I'm going to take another approach at understanding Halloween and some of the reasons that we have these stories. I started thinking about how to think about genders and an individual outside of thinking about gender fluidity just yet. So, how do we want to understand the way a man is almost biologically created, a woman is biologically created, how women may have certain understandings about emotion and they're almost driven with heart. Women don't necessarily defer from trying to understand logic and how to kind of think in a assertive way anymore, the way they might have in the past, maybe because the socialization and the expectation has changed. And same with men. So you'll find that men are also trying to understand how to be more compassionate, how to be assertive, how to be successful business people or leaders in the world that aren't just driven by just a mathematical kind of the logical way, and they're trying to understand, where's my heart in all of this and what resonates in a healthy way. And then, so as we're doing this, you're understanding how civilization is really progressing in a very healthy way. So right now, I talked a little bit about how sometimes we understand um, outside of like a robot, for example, how our body works and how it can regenerate really quickly. So when I was, I think in my late 20s, I had a really bad eye infection. And because I wear contacts, it actually ended up eating at my cornea, like that clear layer that's sitting on top of our eye. And I went to the doctor and he just gave me eye drops. He told me not to put my contacts in again and just to take these eye drops for I think like a week or two. And then, and then he said it'll be fine after that. And before actually going to the doctor, I could actually lift the cornea, like I'd lift like a layer, like when you have a layer of skin, like when you're peeling eggs. Do you know that fine layer that's sometimes sitting on top of the egg white? That's literally what it looked like, and it hurt so much, like unbelievable pain. But it made me realize that that's pretty cool because that's what the laser eye surgery is. Like if you have corrective lenses, like if you're in glasses or contacts, you can actually do laser surgery and it'll naturally just correct the way you see so you don't have to wear those anymore. So it made me think about like that's basically a robot. Like the machine is called a robot of some sort, but it's probably called, they give it a name, which is laser eye surgery. So the machine itself is built to do some kind of medical job. Now, if you think of an actual human being that's a robot, you'll know the difference that one is created from metal, and then you think, well, humans were created from another human being. So you see the difference now is that we feel, our body regenerates, our body heals. Sometimes we build analogies, so we say this machine or this computer is like a human in that it can be programmed to think, and we can be socialized to think. So women might have been socialized to stay at home and raise their kids. Now they're thinking we can do that, and we can also find a job, and we can send our kids to daycare. And so it can be a little bit of both, where the kids are understanding the importance of learning with each other, with other adults, how to trust, how to build likes and dislikes similar to other people and different from other people. And also some of the things that we do at home that may be different, and they can kind of collaborate and say, oh, at home we do this, or we've never tried rice before. We usually eat pasta. And then it becomes, well, they go home and they say, can we have rice or can we have pasta? Can we have a little bit of both? And in Egypt, that's actually, kosheri is a meal that's a mix of lentils, rice, and pasta. So it's almost cool. It's like creating a synthesis of different ideas. In this case, it's foods, but you see how analogies kind of create themselves as we go. Within the study of religion, this is called syncretism, where people might have decided that 2,000 years ago, with Jesus coming into the world as it is, like he was a human, and then maybe a spirit kind of brought him into the world and then left without him. So it's almost like the spirit part of him left, and then his body was left, looked like somebody else, and then he got buried. So thinking of life this way, it's almost the way we think of Easter, is that when we think of Easter, we think of Easter eggs, we think of bunnies, we think of baby chicks, and these are all things that we think of in the spring, like flowers, where maybe a season was almost helping us stay inside because it's cold, so we can think of what does it mean to retreat for a little bit from the world, or like kind of hibernate, as it were. But as humans, we don't think of it as hibernating as much as maybe we just need to kind of stay inside where it's warmer. And then, we're looking forward to the spring, so it's almost like we're rebirthing breathing in a different way. Like we're going outside and we're like, so it's like almost a rebirth. Like there's a different part of us that's kind of waking up, that's been sleeping because it's too cold, or we couldn't do as much outside because maybe we don't like winter sports. So if you understand this cycle, you think, so what is Easter? And some people will think about it with like the story of Jesus. Some won't, and they'll just wonder about, it's kind of cool to just buy seasonal items and, gift each other. But for example, from Egypt, if I was to come to Canada and say, I don't know what Easter is, and then, I learn different stories because I talk to different people and ask them what they celebrate and what is Easter. And then they start telling me, oh, it's just a way of celebrating life all the time. Because sometimes in the winter, it doesn't look like there's life anywhere. Everything's just kind of cold. So then I think, oh, cool. So I'm planting flowers and I'm buying chocolate. That's kind of like celebrating Easter. I'm like, all right, cool. I celebrate Easter. And as you're going through time and understanding different cultures, that kind of becomes like what pluralism is. It's just a way of not challenging a way of life or a way of thinking as right or wrong. It's just trying to understand it and then saying, I want to integrate that in my life. And it becomes part of who you are and what your daily practices are, or seasonal or annual practices are. So when I was at Carleton, I had one professor describe this because I took a course where they had put all three of the Abrahamic faiths together. So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all together. And he was trying to kind of give an introductory to each and almost find a way of understanding like what is the common ground between all three of these, even though they don't always get along. And I thought it was really neat because when he talked about Islam, he talked about Sufism, which is a mystical approach to understanding monotheism, or like this idea of oneness in the world. And it actually was really good because that's basically what Christianity tries to do, and so does Judaism. So if you think of Judaism, their idea is, I'm going to talk about Prophet Ibrahim for a little bit because he's known as the father of all prophets in that in the Quran, he's described as somebody who is always inclining to truth, meaning he could believe what other people in his community were believing, but if there was something that he felt uncertain about or wasn't sure, like, this isn't really satisfying a question in me, so he'll go in the world and explore and try to find another meaning. So because his community was actually really annoyed with him that he kept doing this, and that he kept questioning them, like he'd question the rationale. So if they say, give him an answer, he'd be like, no, and then he'd go and he'd find another, so he'd find another answer or search for another answer. And because we find this as adults, like especially parents, if kids ask us a question, we'll be like, I feel like I should know the answer to this. And then we're just like, we feel a little bit like our kid's going to judge us. But that's not the way it is. Kids are usually like, oh, if you don't have an answer, that's okay. We'll go look for it. Maybe we'll look for it together. And it almost takes that pressure off of somebody always having to know the answer, especially now with the internet and everything's so accessible. Knowledge is like everywhere and we can integrate new ideas all the time. So anyway, maybe they felt back then, they felt like we should know the answer to this and we don't. So they just felt threatened or insecure about something. So they decided they're going to torture him. So they made this really, really big fire. They let it burn, like they're stoking it. They're trying to make it really, really big. And then they tied him up and they made a catapult, like one of those things that throw. And they threw him in. And God, being somebody who's already chosen Ibrahim to be somebody who's going to help change and progress with time, to help people understand how to build civilization, how to become people who are thinking in a new way as the world kind of changes. He made it easy for Ibrahim. So he didn't feel scared about it all. He's just like, when you feel really strongly about something, nothing really scares you. You're just fearless. You're just like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything wrong. I just want to go get out of my way. And then he'll just continue to do that. So when he was in the fire, two angels came to visit him. And they're like, Ibrahim, do you have anything that you need? And then his reply was, not from you two. And it was almost an understanding of, I know that I've already been dealing with people and things that like talk to me in nature. And I know there's something bigger that's answering my questions. So I'm going to keep wondering about that. So that's why he wasn't called, like the Quran will say, he's a Hanif, which means somebody who inclines to truth. Like he's always looking for something bigger. And now that we have stories of Muhammad who came a lot in the future still, a call to prayer or remembrance is always centering around Allahu Akbar, which means God is greater. So anytime you think of something that could help you in the world, you can think God is greater. Like I can maybe ask for support from you and I can support you in return, but in the end, I know you're not God and you can't really harm me or protect me past a certain point. right? After which I can still rely on God and say, okay, this person has helped me this much. Now I have to rely on God and find inspiration within myself again. So you're not turning people into gods or like this ultimate power. You know that there's something bigger that you can always go back to if, they get stuck or they don't want to help you anymore. It's like, it's not the end of the world. So we now that we know that about people, you can understand why some people have this psychology where they never get mad at actual people for a very long time. Like they might get upset and say, you know, I'll draw a boundary where I'm not going to take your ideas anymore, but it's not that I don't like you as a person. It's just there's a behavior about you that I don't understand, and because of that behavior in you, I can't get along with you and I can't be your friend. But they're not going to go and torture that person or try to hurt them or kill them. They're just going to say, up to this point, we can't be friends because this behavior makes it very difficult for us to get along, right? So it's focusing on, maybe you're not willing to change your mind about something that I want to change my mind about. So sometimes people will say, you're not allowed to think about God as somebody who's a lover, right? Somebody who you can love in a compassionate way that'll help you understand how to love another human in an intimate way. They don't want to think about God that way. That's fine. But if you want to think about that God that way, because in history there was a woman named Rabia who I think used to be a concubine, which is she used to be just a woman who used to dance and entertain men. And then she understood a little bit about God and she decided she didn't even want to hang out with men anymore. She was just like, I don't even want to get married. She's just like, I'm just so devoted to God that she just lost interest in everything in the world. And she used to talk to God as her lover, like, because she understood this kind of intimate compassion in her that she experienced with other people, but then she found it wasn't enough. Like it would come and go and people might treat her very unkindly. And she's like, whatever, man, like prayer does this for me all the time. So because of that, she felt fine talking to God and kind of creating God in her mind in that way. So for someone to come and say you're not allowed to, it's just like, well, you're welcome to not have to, but don't stop me from doing that. Like we both have freedom of expression. There's no correct way. There's no standard here with God. Like if God's allowing me to exist and he's allowing me to think this way, let God deal with me. You leave me alone. So now Ibrahim, because he understood that the spirit can embody people, it was almost like he was trying to do the same thing. He wouldn't attack people. Like he would attack their idols. Like if they built the idol out of sand um, or cement or whatever it was, he would break it down and see, look, God can't defend itself. This doesn't make sense. And then he'd walk away. Like he's trying to engage with them and help them think. Like you might like doing something because it made sense a long time ago, and maybe your ancestors and our ancestors did this, but now that we're thinking in a different way, maybe we have to revisit why we're doing what we're doing. So later on in life, he was, I think, in his 90s. Two angels visited him again, and he was scared. He was just like, oh no, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And this also tells us that our minds build associations. So sometimes when we listen to music, if we remember, we were in the gym, for example, and we had a dance party, when we listen to that song in the future, our mind will go back to that time and we'll be like, oh yeah, we used to listen, and it'll kind of give you that joy and you'll feel like it's called nostalgia. So that's basically what Ibrahim had. He remembered, when I was in the fire, these angels came to visit, and then what happened? And then he'll think, oh, it's okay, I don't have to worry because God ended up actually asking the fire to stay cool and peaceful. So you can see how God is actually greater than any of the elements. So we understand that fire, we come close to it, it burns. But because Ibrahim was understanding that, no, there's something greater than that, than fire. God's not fire, he's greater than that. So then God actually asked the fire, he said to the fire not to burn Ibrahim. So it just burnt the ties around him and he was able to walk away and he was free. So these are called miracles, which is basically any break in any kind of physical law in the world. So we understand that if I have wood and I light it on fire, it's going to light. If I have fire and it doesn't light whatever this is, I could start wondering, like, maybe it's a new material that's fire resistant. So maybe it's something like what firefighters wear so that they don't catch on fire. So then you start to think, oh, there's something new that's being invented. And people are understanding something that's like innovative and it's a pioneering idea, and then they kind of progress through civilization. So it didn't actually break the law of what fire can do. It's just we built something and now we understand why maybe it can be kind of like a miracle because you were inspired. But at the time, that wasn't really anything, so it was called a miracle. Now, if you think about David, he was also visited by two angels. So he was sitting in his prayer chamber, like a place that he almost set aside for, I like to just stay here and worship. Two angels visited him, and they came to him almost with a question. And also he was scared because he's like, I'm usually here by myself. What is this? So they came to him and they said, there's two of us and we both have a problem in our business transaction and we need you to solve it for us. So after, I think he made a mistake, like he made an error in judgment. And then he felt scared. He's like, oh my God, I have to pray and ask for forgiveness. And the angel, later God came to him in like an inspiration, saying that, yeah, it's important for you to worship, but you have to be in the world to understand how to deal with people. So your worship actually didn't give you the experience that you need to help solve this problem. And I'm not going to inspire you because your inspiration is to be in the world, and then you'll be helped with God, which is kind of what goes back to what we try to understand now about monasticism or retreating from the world for a little bit, is that it's meant to be like a temporary solution for anxiety or for questioning the universe, where you almost want to take time off from just whatever your daily worldly chores or kind of errands are, so that you're not distracted by them and they don't occupy all that working space in your mind. And then you can just focus on, like, I have an important question about the universe I have to kind of resolve, and then I can go back to living. And that solution that I hopefully came to terms with will help me answer whatever questions I have when I deal with people again in the universe. So it's almost a way that, like, all these prophets through time, they're almost wanting to stay with God and just retreat and maybe stay in a mountain or like in a little private temple and worship. But these miracles always come back and almost say, no, we're pushing you out. You have to build civilization. You have to continue to work in the world. You have to understand how people work and learn how to coexist together. So the fact that these angels came and were kind of like a little bit scary to these people almost explains why when it came time to Muhammad, that angel came to him in a very scary way the very first time he came to him when he was 40. But after that, he came to him in a very gentle way. So he would embody people who were known to be kind, so that the prophet would always have that association where, oh, what's going to happen? Like, I don't know what to do with this. And like, should I be scared? Is it going to hurt me? So now we understand, moving forward, like from psychology, how to integrate how we should deal with people who are different from us and what their behavior is. So we can just say we love all people, but there are some behaviors that we don't understand about people, and we're trying to understand how to get along. And if we can't, we can build a boundary and say, I like you as a person, but because my behavior and your behavior don't get along yet, maybe we won't be friends. But we're not going to hurt each other. We're not going to go out of our way to try to kill each other or, like, spread gossip or make bullies or anything. It's just going to be like, you know what? I have something to learn. You have something to learn. And until then, maybe we'll have different friends. So I'm going to take this a little bit further and wonder about science now, because with robots, sometimes we think, well, I really want this person to behave in a certain way. So why don't I try to build a robot that's going to force them to do this, what I want to do? I mean, in a way, that's using your brain. You're thinking of a solution, but your solution is almost not helping you and it's not helping the other person, because our challenge is always to think of new ways and to think about how to think in a way that's not going to be hurting. So if I'm building a robot that's going to hurt somebody and force them to do something that I already know they don't want to do, then that's kind of like bullying, right? It's almost like forcing someone to do something and they're not convinced of it. So if I say, like, I have a niece, for example, let's say her name is Rebecca. So I'm a 20-year-old, and she's 5. And she sees me praying in a certain way. So I go to church maybe on Sundays, and I say, I'm going to go to church, come with me. And she'll say, no, I don't want to. I already went with my dad last Sunday, and I didn't like it. So I'll say, oh, no, but we'll go, and then we'll go for, we'll go for some time at the park and maybe watch a movie after. She'll say, no. And then I'll say, think about it for a little bit. I'm like, I don't like being said no to. So then maybe I'll let her go, and then I'll start building like a robot or something that'll make her want to change her mind. Meanwhile, she's playing, she's already engaging with nature. She already understands something about the universe and spiritual life that maybe she's not learning at church, or maybe she's not learning when she goes to the mosque, or she goes wherever she's supposed to go just to learn how to pray. So in this way, you can see how if I was a different aunt, let's call her Joan, she comes and says, I'm going to the mosque. Do you want to come? And the girl will say, no, I already went with my mom. I didn't like it. So she'll say, oh, well, then tell me what you do like. And then she'll go with her and she'll say, oh, well, I went to the park and I found this friend. She had a puppy and she was walking her puppy. And in this way, they're already understanding everything they need to know, is that we have to be kind to people, kind to animals. We understand why people have pets, the importance of taking care of a pet. So, if they have to go poo in the park, you can pick up their poop and put it in the garbage so that you're not making a mess and people like fall in it almost and then feel uncomfortable. So all of these ways of learning how to interact with other people is basically what God is trying to encourage us to do. Like that's why we have this heart. Like it's difficult to place anywhere other than like we'll say it's kind of close to where our lungs are, so it helps us breathe. But in the end, it's almost like this just big consciousness around us, and it's kind of what creates this ethic that helps people understand I shouldn't hurt this person just because. Like even if they can't defend themselves, I still shouldn't go and help and hurt them, right? I have to understand like, well, what's in me that wants to hurt and why. So one of the things around robots and essentialism is that we almost don't understand what this consciousness is inside of an actual person, right? So I said that sometimes people dream, and maybe it's because they had a certain socializing uh, life before. So let's, for example, say I was born in my mom's tummy um, in Egypt, and my brother, he was born here in Canada. So the environment in Egypt is very different than the one in Canada. Maybe here in Canada, because it's cold, he's going to be born somebody who's okay with playing in cold weather. Whereas for me, my body's like, no, no, I need warm weather, and I get really uncomfortable in cold weather. That's just one example of what our consciousnesses now are going to be a little bit different. If you think of stories, you might think in Egypt, maybe people used to hear a lot of these scriptures being read out loud, right? So my consciousness or like my hearing is basically tied to my mom living in Egypt. So it might be a little bit different than my brother who maybe just hears it quietly with my mom just reading it quietly to herself. So those are kind of the same, but they're still very, very different. So now when he dreams and when I dream, they might be very different because our conscious may be going in different directions. I'm a girl, he's a boy. All these things now become things to celebrate and almost wonder about instead of saying, well, one's going to be better than the other. And we always have to compare and decide, well, and it's something outside of our control anyway. Like, what are we going to blame our mom because like she moved or like it ends up not making sense if we follow the logic all the way back. So the reason I mention this is because I had this experience with trying to wonder about what the soul is, what the spirit is, and then what's our essential nature, like what's very specific to just one person that makes them unique. So outside of that, we know that our fingerprints identify who we are, right? If you look at the eye, sometimes it can, I guess it has a certain image that people can identify with the face or with the eye, and nobody else can kind of copy that. With technology, you can probably override all of that, which kind of makes us wonder, like, when do we stop and kind of backtrack and kind of go back to maybe a few years ago when we didn't have this technology? Anyway, something to wonder about. But if we go back to the soul, you think, I don't understand what the soul is because it can move around during the night because basically it's consciousness. Like if I'm thinking of something and I'm inspired, maybe my soul will go meet the spirit angel and it'll think of ideas and then it'll come back to me, and that's basically my soul. The spirit basically is I don't stop breathing. So it's my lungs and my brain. So if I'm dead, my spirit's gone. Like I don't have life anymore. And then when you think of it, your essential nature, it could be maybe it's those two and my consciousness. So basically everything that I remember from the time I was born all the way down to Adam. But because I don't have an actual memory of it, it's basically somewhere in my subconscious. And kind of like our genes, depending on what I do in the world, part of it will kind of wake up a little bit more than other parts. So some people might say, okay, well, we've advanced so much in science that, we have this one person who's like a genius. They know so much about the world, but they're maybe 80 and they're going to die. And we don't want to lose that in the world. So we're going to find somebody who is maybe in high school, who's just beginning to learn about life, and they want to volunteer and say, you know what, I don't mind lying down next to this person who's 80 and is about to die, and almost seeing if you can copy his body and put it on mine. So you might think, well, they're volunteering and the ethics says, we can do this probably in a safe way that's not going to hurt anybody. And if this person's dying, and this person's pretty new, like at life, he's probably 18, which means he's got all his energy. You might think, yeah, it's probably not going to harm anybody. Like this person's organs maybe are okay and these person's organs aren't shutting down. So all we have to do is try to figure out how to do that. Now, we can think, yeah, why not? We don't really understand why we die yet. So maybe, and we understand that life and rebirth is a thing. So it's almost like Captain America, where we can freeze a body for a certain amount of time and then maybe wake it up in the future and see if that's going to be a thing. So we go through the scientific method. We find the reason why. And then as we're doing this, we realize that, well, the 18-year-old doesn't seem to remember anything anymore. He seems maybe a little bit lost in the world. Like he's like, somebody's trying to see with me with this 80-year-old, but I don't have all his knowledge. Like they're trying to tell me what to do, and then when I get it wrong, I get in trouble, and all these problems start to come around like emotions, and he starts to feel like I'm supposed to be super smart, but I don't know if I feel that way, and I'm kind of confused because if I think for myself, I get in trouble, and if the person who's trying to control this dead person but assumes it's me is telling me no, I should be doing something this way, but it's maybe something this 80-year-old did when he was 50, so it's maybe not supposed to be used anymore, and then it just starts to create confusion. So then you can understand that these are already three different people. So you have the scientist who's trying to understand what this 80-year-old did. So those are already two different people. And then you have, and maybe this scientist is, let's say he's 50, right? So you got a 50-year-old and an 80-year-old and an 18-year-old. And now this 18-year-old is like, I'm growing up with these friends who are like starting new things with technology that this 80-year-old didn't have when he was 18. And I'm trying to understand his brain, and then I don't even understand if we have the same background. Now this 60-year-old or 50-year-old, I don't even know what he thinks about either of us, and what his background is, and whether he likes robots anymore. And I'm not a robot, I'm still a human. I hope he remembers that. She remembers that. So now you understand, oh, you have to pause. So even if this 50-year-old had a really good idea, his bias might be, we should continue going, right? Because I really like this idea and I think it's going to work. We just have to be patient. 80-year-old can't talk. He's already dead. This 18-year-old, he's thinking, I need somebody to believe me that this is happening, right? And I need a 6-year-old to hear me. So if that 18-year-old is saying, I want to quit, and that 50-year-old or 60-year-old scientist says no, then that becomes a problem, which is why we usually have these ethic boards that involve a lot of people. So it's not just one person who's relying on himself and assuming it's going to work. And then, if these two get in a fight, like who's going to win, right? It's going to be like, we're probably just all going to want to die because this is just a bad experiment, which is unfair because, I mean, this 18-year-old, he had his own life ahead of him. And this 50-year-old could probably, if he backs out, can suggest, well, maybe how can we improve on this idea so we don't repeat it? And then how do we improve on it, for example? So you can now say that this 50-year-old, that 80-year-old, and that 18-year-old, they have an essential nature, which means they have a history that they built from when they were newborns all the way up to whatever age they are at that point that's very specific to them, which means they had certain emotions, they had certain family, they had certain memories, they had certain joys, certain fears, certain new confidences around skills that they built that are very, very specific to them as an individual. Now, that 80-year-old, because he had all that life experience, he can say, you can read my brain maybe, and you can see that this is what I did, and you can try to put that emotion on the other person, but he'll just sit there confused, be like, why am I scared all of a sudden? And maybe it was around, the sound of a car turning on. Whereas for him, it's like, this is so normal. Like, I don't even hear cars turning on anymore. I'm like, everywhere I go, there's like electric cars. You can't even hear them. So for him to feel scared around a car doesn't make sense, and that's going to confuse his brain. Maybe he'll be like, is it going to blow up? So you can understand why the heart and the mind, when they don't align in a way that's normal, it creates so much confusion. And that's where mental health problems can kind of arise, and people almost need to take a break from it all. And they retreat, and they're just like, what did my mind just like experience? What did my eyes see? And then like, is my body like, and they almost have to kind of remind themselves, I am human. Like I have to remember almost like an infant how to start all over again. And we shouldn't make light of this or think that, it's not a big deal, because our mind takes so long to overcome a fear. Like if you experience something in the wild and it scares you, it takes a very long time for you to overcome that, even though it just took you a second to feel scared. So imagine you're walking, like I experienced this for a little bit, probably only twice, where I saw a snake. They're usually garden snakes. They're not very harmful. But my experience with snakes has always been in movies or in nature videos. And they're usually talked about like really big and really scary. Or if I've seen one in real life, it's been in a zoo where it's in a cage. It's usually sleeping. So when I first saw the snake, the first time, it was so fast and it just went in a hole and it was gone. I was just like, I can't believe I saw a real snake. And then the second time I saw it, it was so mesmerizing. Like it was just moving in a way that was like, sometimes when you see a flame or a candle, it's just like, it moves in such a subtle way. You're just like, that's really cool. But then it's gone. And then you just want to hold on to that memory and kind of wonder like, what is it about life that's really attractive like that you kind of just want to almost gaze at it and kind of wonder. But then because it's not there, you almost have to rely on your memory. Now, that's not a memory that these three people can share. It's almost like taste. Like if someone tasted honey and it's like, okay, I know what honey is now. That 80-year-old might have not tasted it, and same with that 18-year-old. And how are you supposed to say you're going to not now taste honey, but then you give them sugar? They're gonna be like, no, that's they're just gonna say honey's gross. But it wasn't honey, it was sugar, because sometimes sugar is too sweet and it actually like gives you a headache a little bit. So this is something I want to talk about because I'm going to actually segue into Halloween and how um, to me, syncretism kind of created Halloween, where we had all these stories about the spirits and prophets and miracles that scares people, and they don't really know how to make it light and story-like so that we don't scare kids when we try to tell them a little bit about the universe, but we try to make it engaging. So like, here, wear this costume and pretend that you're scary, like you're a knight, and you have to take me down, and I'm a dragon. But what am I as a dragon? And you can think, well, maybe it's an idea that's brand new, and it's almost like the dragon's like, "Rawr," like you have to turn me off. What is it that's inside of you as a knight that's scaring you? So then you think, oh, he's being brave, so he's turning it off. As the fire is something that's saying, you can learn to wear a t-shirt instead of a turtleneck all the time. So you might think, no, no, I'm not allowed to because my culture says I'm not allowed to. But then the knight says, well, I'm going to try it anyway. So then he takes off his turtleneck and decides to put a t-shirt on, and the dragon vanishes. And then he's like, oh, I'm a pretty brave knight. And then he tries to go find another dragon or like an adventure or a challenge. So all these creative ways that we've, through time, have learned to almost create, it's called a myth, which is, it's a story and it looks like it's made up, but it's actually based on true events. And usually it's meant to help us understand, like, what can we learn from this, or what in life can be an analogy to what this fairy tale is. And I think over time, because we become sometimes literal, where we think that, okay, it's talking about a dragon. What's a real dragon? They don't exist. But if we think, well, challenges are real, and usually challenges are almost disguised in something scary. So if I say, hey, let's go bungee jumping, where, you go up on this really, really, really big lift, and at the top there's this platform, and they put a harness on you and a really, really sturdy cord, and then you jump, and it catches you, and you just kind of end up floating, kind of like a pendulum, right? So that looks really, really scary. But what do you think you can learn from that? Like if you're somebody who likes to go surfing, you think, I want an adrenaline rush, but maybe I'm scared of swimming. So then you think, oh, well, here's something that's going to give me that feeling. So I'm not going to go maybe be bored and then look for trouble. This is just a way to kind of help my body, my emotions and my hormones experience that adrenaline, and then it's relieved. And then I can go back to life. Other people, they want quiet. So instead of, falling asleep and then deciding, I don't want to go to work, I just want to live in my room forever, they can decide, I'm going to actually travel to a new city and I'm going to live in a hotel for a week. And I'm just going to experience what it is to be in a different environment. And then maybe I'll just go around and see what's happening. And because of that calming, different environment, I'm almost allowing myself to get used to change. And then I go back home and I say, okay, I have to find a job now because I need to find a little bit of a change. So it's just like mini dragons, but they don't have to be scary that breathe fire, right? It's almost like it's showing you that it's scary, but then when you come close to it, it's not actually something that's going to burn you, but it's going to help you grow. So this could be why people talk about passion as fire. Like it's something in you that you believe so strongly in, that you just have to understand how to work with it in a socially acceptable way. So if I feel like, oh my gosh, I have this really, really good idea, and I go and I tell my neighbor, and my neighbor's like, yeah, I know, but we already know that in this community, fireworks aren't maybe something that people are going to like. But if you go to the park, they usually show fireworks, and maybe you can ask to get a job so you can be part of the people who display the fireworks, right? So then I understand, oh, I have an idea, but I can't use it right away. So that impulse is like, okay, delayed gratification. I have to wait. And then I have to see, like, where is it socially acceptable to find an outlet for this impulse so that I can do it safely and I'm not harming anybody. So I'm going to stop there, and then we'll maybe continue on again next time.